on Instagram and also on YouTube. I'm just waiting for my friends to come over to Instagram. Hopefully, technology will not fail us on this occasion. So there we go. There we are. I've seen a little. They're both here. They are both here. Cheeky minxes. And hopefully, they're going to let me bring them up. I've pressed. There's one.
I'm on both things.
And there's two. You're on. You did it.
We
did it.
Yay me!
Big
After last week's absolute disaster.
Gold stars for you. Welcome, friends. Now then, we've got to keep this one tight because we have an after party to get to. So, without further ado, shall I hop into the good stuff and do the bad thing?
Do it.
Yeah.
Right. Welcome, friends. It's just gone 8:15. It's Wednesday. This is History After Dark. We called it that. It's actually getting dark now, for the winter is upon us. But the title works even in summer, because we do like to impart historical facts, but we like to do so whilst indulging our passion for four-letter expletives, smut, and general depravity. So with that being said, if you happen... I mean, Philippa, you're raising an eyebrow, but you're here, love, and you love it.
There's no good looking all innocent and judgmental lady.
Acting like she's above it, but she's the ringleader of this three-ring circus. So... if you happen to be in an open plan office with a judgmental boss who is just itching to give you disciplinary, this is not the one to be listening on speaker. Put a headphone in. If you are in a car, a kitchen, a living room with a small child, a child who is a dobber, we call this child Timmy. Timmy is a problem. Check out our merch store. Timmy is the sort of child that hears one thing one time. Oh, hello, dropped it. It didn't break because that's quality merch you get there. I dropped that on a plug. And it didn't break. It drop tested.
Yay!
Bizarre all round. Timmy is a problem because he is the sort of child that hears one thing one time, depraved as it may be. He then locks that away in the steel trap of a mind that he has and takes it into school with him, tells his teacher, who looks like Miss Honey, maid of innocence, doesn't watch History After Dark, so does not know the first cardinal rule of History After Dark, which is, friends, if you don't know, don't Google it. It's not for you, and that's fine. So she goes away and Googles the thing that Timmy's just said, and thus she now needs therapy. You've got to pay for it because you've corrupted the poor Miss Honey, and they're also going to call you up to school, which is going to be embarrassing because then you've got to explain why your child knows the things that it knows. So put a headphone in is my advice. So we've already covered the one rule. If you don't know what it means, don't Google it. It's not for you. The other rule is you are all adults. Please, God, I hope. We do not condone this being a drinking game, but as you are all adults, you must do what you want, but we don't condone it. And the final rule that we have so far is we aren't going to kink shame. We aren't going to yuck your yum, but the first rule of kink is that it does have to be consensual. So if you want to be shamed on the internet, we are not the place for you. If you wish to put a comment that's going to get us to try and embarrass you, we aren't the place for you, because it's not cool to involve people in your kink without their permission.
I just thought we let them get away with it being a kink. They're not just arseholes, it's a kink. Or equally, don't be an arsehole in the comments.
Equally, don't be an arsehole. Yeah. Because the thing is, what we will do is we will share it between ourselves and all of our history friends, and talk about what a knob people are. We've done that.
Be labelled.
We have many times.
Many times.
Many times. Lottie Rose, what about the people who fancy the fox?
They are right. Well... They are right to fancy the fox. Right. Disney's Robin Hood is a fitty. The end. Full stop.
The end. Okay.
The end.
Oh dear. Chrissy says, I'm with you. I'm always telling people it's not for you. I mean, you're obviously not talking about hats. Oh, the other thing is hang on, I'll tell you what you didn't mention. You need to watch it live just in case.
I did. That's true. I forgot a bit. We do also, if you can't put a headphone in, then you can always watch it on the playback here on the Instagram or the YouTube. I say that it's always worth watching us live because there is a risk. It's happened once before. We might say something that is so utterly, unspeakably, borderline illegally depraved that we have to yeet that footage into the sun because none of us would do well in prison. We're all too pretty. So It's happened.
I've been working on my biceps.
Well, Dorothy says I'm looking very lovely. Thank you, Dorothy. So I'm clearly too pretty for prison today, at least.
So we recommend to do it live
today, maybe not, but
the recommendation is to listen live. But if you can't, then chance your arm on a playback. Maybe you are watching this on the playback, in which case, hello. Yeah. This is about to get messy because we are talking about Edward VI. Yes. And I've just done the disclaimer, and I am, in fact, also going first. It's going to be a lot of me talking. I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet. The way we've chosen to divide Edward up is we have chosen to divide him up into personal life, religion, and politics. And I drew the straw of personal life. So I'm going to be doing that. That does mean, of course, that we're going to be going forwards to come backwards, to go forwards to come backwards. That is the way we've set this up. But let's see the breed of git that he is. Edward is born in the Queen's rooms at Hampton Court on the 12th of October, 1537. He is the product of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour. We know Jane Seymour as Henry VIII's third wife. Henry knows Jane Seymour as his first wife. Indeed, we are told when he is baptised on the 15th of October in the chapel at Hampton Court, we are told that he is a prince conceived in most lawful matrimony, which needed to be stated because the other ones were apparently questionable. So this is the first time since 1511 and a short-lived Duke of Cornwall that Henry has an heir in the cradle of England. The christening is splendid. We have the herald's records of the procession. His half sisters, the Lady Elizabeth, is being carried in the procession. His older half sister, the Lady Mary, who is 20 to 21 years his senior, is also taking pride of place in this procession. And his godparents, we've got Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury. We've got Thomas Howard. We have got also his half sister Mary is another one of his godparents. He is being carried himself by the Marchioness of Exeter, Gertrude Courtenay, and his uncles are also having a really important place of ceremony. So all is well. And by all accounts, Edward is a lusty child. There is no indication of any real health concerns. Sadly, when he is 12 days old, his mother, Jane Seymour, dies of complications related to the birth. It has been suggested that she may have got an infection, perhaps from unsanitary practices. The other suggestion is that she may have had retained placenta, so it just wasn't properly evacuated. What we have now is we have one heir of England, and there is going to be a desire for a spare. So then we get the backdrop of Edward's growing up is his father's continued marital escapades. So we get the disaster of Anne of Cleves, then we get the tragedy of Catherine Howard, and then finally he marries Catherine Parr. And for Edward, it does certainly seem that she is for him a mother that he loves. He writes to her, calling her mater or mater carissima, as in my dearest mother. They compare notes on Latin. They compare notes on religion. Catherine Parr is a sort of a firebrand, if you will, for the reforming movement. And as time goes on, so Edward will be. And there is potentially, against the backdrop of the loss and the misery and the threat, there is, I think, in Henry and Catherine's relationship, for all of the royal children, a semblance of stability and potentially normalcy. That does partially blow up when Henry does, of course, sign an arrest warrant for Catherine Parr, and then she kind of wriggles out of that. But at Henry's death, their world implodes. So as Henry VIII lays dying, Catherine Parr is kept from him, and Edward's uncle, Edward Seymour, is essentially looking to grab power. The authority that he manages to obtain for the regency is not what Henry intended and is not normal. He orchestrates a position where he is the Lord Protector. So he sits at the head of this council, and on top of that, he has custody of the king's person. This is abnormal. And I think off the back of this, we have his former stepmother, Catherine Parr. My interpretation is that is why she marries Thomas Seymour, because she is looking to do a power grab. And Edward is the pawn in all of this. So he's not a stupid boy. We know that he is incredibly well educated, but he's also got a lot of nous, and he's very, very, very bright. And also, as time goes on, clearly very assured of his place in the world. When Catherine Parr marries Thomas, there has been a time where they've gone to Edward and they've tried to get him to make it seem like it's his idea that they marry, that it's actually a good idea, that with immodest haste, his stepmother marries his uncle. And I think when the marriage happens and he sees the fallout, he realizes that they were trying to trick him, that he was had by it, not us had, that he'd been had by him. And I do wonder actually if one of those moments is the point where he hardens a little bit, where he starts to play chess, not checkers. We hear stories about him being quite cold. One of his tutors tells him to write a journal, it's suggested, or a diary. And I think when we think of a diary, we think of, dear diary, my boobs won't grow. Please help me.
I don't think you wrote that in yours, Kat.
No, I did not. Or, dear diary, will a boy ever look at me with anything other than morbid disgust? No. Also, and fair though, I was a weird Wednesday Addams kind of kid. It was valid. And the things that I think get picked up about the diary, especially, and get commented on, is the 2 entries about the executions of his uncles. So Thomas Seymour, Baron Sudeley, and Edward Seymour, Lord Protector. And in both cases, it's a very factual state of affairs. So-and-so was executed on Tower Hill at 9 a.m. for this reason, or not even for the reason. And people have taken that and gone, look at this psychopathic, uncaring monster of a child. I think that is a misreading of what's happening. I don't think it means that he wasn't a psychopath, but I happen to think it's a misreading, because what is very clear to me is that Edward is not writing a diary in the way that we write a diary under lock and key, put it under the mattress and burn it if you think you're dying. He is writing a chronicle.
When you've got a friend who has to come around and get rid, that kind of diary.
Yeah, that when you're like, babe, I feel like I'm going into A&E, and here's where the stash is. Burn that shit.
Nowadays, it's don't let anyone hold my phone over my face for facial recognition.
I hope that my dead face will look so unlike my live face that it won't Face ID.
Gonna put a fake moustache on.
Yeah, because the thing is, and you're probably all right, because I believe that in part of it is looking at your vascular structure.
So
you need one.
Part of it might not work if you don't
need blood.
Potentially. Yeah, if once liver mortis sets in, you're not going to be
all right.
You're fine. So, that was a tangent, wasn't it? No, I mean, I liked it. Don't get me wrong. Wednesday Addams and me enjoyed that. I think if we look at it as a chronicle, then it's not cold. If he's looking at the other diaries of the reigns of kings, it is a history. And I think we have misconstrued the history side of chronicling, and we have gone chronicle diary. So that's what I think we need to potentially take our foot off the accelerator of calling Edward a psychopath. However, he was
made up for it.
He was a prig, and possibly a prick also. For me, the outstanding behavior that he has is the way he treats his sister Mary. This woman who is 21 years older than him, who spent they spent a lot of time together in Edward's childhood. She was like another mother to him. She almost certainly would have been involved in, I don't know, teaching him to use a spoon. And this little sod, because she's a devout Roman Catholic and a practicing Roman Catholic, and uppity Edwards is head of the church or some shit. Which he was supreme head of the church, so I'll give him that. But this tiny Ayatollah is full of his own piss and vinegar, and is aerated by his council and his religious leaders into being like, Mary's practicing of the Catholic faith is beyond the pale. It needs to stop. We need to punish her. Of course, she does have the might of the Habsburgs behind her, so you can't go after her too hard, because imprisoning Mary, denying her the mass, which Edward talks about, that is really a fuck around and find out situation for England and Edward, because there were plans, there were talks about, as the situation becomes more devastating, as there are threats against Mary's friends, as they're trying to move against her, there are talks about trying to spirit her out of the country. And these two siblings, who clearly did love each other, really fall out over matters of faith. And to some degree, there are two sides to this. She is 21 years older than him, and he is her baby brother, who is an orphan and king of England, while he's still barely out of short trousers. Does she have to make it a thing? On the other side, he is 21 years younger than her. She taught him to use a spoon. Who the fuck does he think he is to be writing her letters being like, I love you, you're my sister, and that is one of the reasons I have a brotherly love for you, but you should be careful, because if you keep doing your massing, I'm going to not be a happy boy, and I'm going to throw my toys out of the pram, and you won't like me if I'm angry. And I just think
that exact voice.
That's how Edward speaks.
Yeah,
in my head, and there is an element to which I think the audacity of that. It's like, talk about teaching your grandmother to suck eggs, and essentially what Mary says she's asking for is, if my dad made a settlement that I don't like but I can live with, my baby brother, who I also love, is surrounded by all of these Protestant people, and they have got this stuff into his head. What she's saying is, when he comes to his majority, if he wants to make these changes to prayer books, etc., whatever you're going to be talking about this, I will accept it. But as it currently stands, we should be sticking with my father's. I think that Edward's familial bonds are really complicated by the amount of pressure and power that's put into his hands, and the pressure that's put upon him as a young child. He has incredibly big shoes to fill. That is a massive codpiece that he has to deal with.
Not that Henry probably filled it, but
no, almost certainly not. But he made out that he did, and interpretation is 9/10 of the law. And I'm not going to talk for much longer, because I have been waffling, and we do have to keep it to time, and you have loads of stuff to talk about. I do think that we see an element to his personal life in the way in which he sets up Jane Grey to be the next queen after him. She is his cousin. She is somebody I think he respects. I think he respects her learning. But mostly I think he thinks she's a good. There's a good chance that she might make boy babies. And I think what really is happening is that he loves Guildford Dudley. I think he thinks he's really cool and like a bit of a bruiser. And in Edward's personal life, he does have these really lovely friendships with the young men around him. Barnaby Fitzpatrick, he is genuinely kind to Barnaby. He genuinely cares for him. He writes to him with a great deal of affection. But equally, let's remember that Henry VIII could do the exact same thing. I think that the personal life, the fragments of personal life that we can pick out for Edward are concerning, because I think he has all of the capacity to become worse than his father ever was, because I think he's a tyrant at 9. But he's a charming tyrant, just like Daddy. So that's where I think that's my family stuff. I'm gonna drop in there.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
People loving your living history interpretation of Edward there.
I can't even do that, but I can't relax enough. So, is it?
Which is why I need to sit like that.
Is it?
Philippa, it's you.
Is it word of the week? Is that me?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Word of the week.
Okay.
Bum, bum, bum. Word of the week. Word of the week.
So, can you hear me? Okay, because I have my microphone all the way
Okay.
up here. I have 2 actually, but so we'll see, because they're only little. I was going to do a phrase of the week, sort of a great one while I was driving the other day. Completely forgot it by the time I got home.
You've been hanging around with me too much. Is that the sort of thing that I do?
It might come back to me. Never mind. So the first one, you might know this, but let's see. I hadn't heard of it before. Is excogigate.
Ooh.
And I reckon there was probably a lot of excogitating going on at the Tudor court at any one time.
Is it dirty?
No.
Is it some sort of social convention?
Well, codge is think. It's
at the
thinky.
Tudor.
It's something. Is it something
Very
thinky?
good. Very good. Keep going.
Excogitate.
Thing.
It is plotting.
There
Bloody
we
hell,
go.
Catherine.
That's twice I've been
Missed 2
amazing
degrees.
in less than half an hour.
Don't
God,
do you know what I mean? Don't spend it all at once, Catherine.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
So it's to plot, plan, devise, and its Latin roots mean to bring out by thinking. Well done, you 2. That was fabulous. Do you want to know my non-Latin based one? I think this one's cute, because I don't think this has ever affected any of us, but it might have affected people in the audience. An elflock.
Oh, bless you. An elflock. Is that where
Elflock.
you is that where an elflock?
Having intercourse with an elf.
Is that where fairies steal things from you? Is it fairies?
That happens a lot.
It is fairies. They're not stealing. They are being mischievous. No, not quite that nice.
Tooth fairy?
Is it a fairy ring?
No. The lock might give it away.
Can it do with hair?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, is it where they knock your hair up?
They knot your hair up.
Yes.
Elf lock. So if someone has very wavy hair, when you wake up in the morning and it has those annoying knots that have come out of nowhere, it's because the elves have visited you in the night and mangled up your hair.
Yes.
That would be okay if they left shoes, like in the old fairy
Oh,
tale.
like in that. I like that tale.
Yeah.
They were useful elves. But yeah. So there you go. There are your words of the week.
Though, if you do have, not sponsored, but if you do get knotty hair, and also if you get breakouts along your forehead, I recommend a satin wrap for your hair.
I've heard that.
Get ones that suit your hair type.
Pillowcases.
Yeah, I've got a satin pillowcase. That's great for the face. But on top of that, satin for the hair.
What to avoid is shit like this.
I mean, I wouldn't sleep in that, babe. That's very uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable when you're awake.
But yeah, it's definitely I get at least an extra day out of my hair wash because I sleep in satin around my hair every night.
So, there you go, public information broadcast.
Paige, exactly. I've got bonnets and I've got hats and I've got wraps as well.
I like the idea of this. Right, that's what I want for Christmas. Or my birthday, which is on Monday.
Which is on Monday.
Because I'm not normally back from my holiday.
Tell everybody, and I tell absolutely no one.
I know, I missed it. Oh, I've written it down now. You can't get away with that again.
Right. Lucas wrote in my card, "Oh, dear mummy, I hope you have a lovely birthday. Well done on making it this far." I said to him, "Oh, thank you." I said, "Do you think I'll make it much further?" And he said, "No."
He's got a plan.
So,
He's got a plan.
So what's
it's like a thingy from Family Guy, isn't it? Stewie and Lois.
Don't write your will.
If I'm not here in a few weeks, you'll know what's happened.
Yeah, we're definitely blaming him. Right. So I am going to try and cover politics. Now, he's 9 when he becomes king. He's 15 when he dies. This is a little bit awkward. There's a little bit of overlap with what Kat's already said, but let me give it a go. So, as Kat already said, when Edward dies, Henry envisions having a privy council. There's going to be almost like a democratically run government, which is odd for Henry to have thought of. But anyway, this is what he thinks of. He isn't even dead really before his private secretary William Paget is saying, "Oh, I don't reckon this is going to work." So him and Edward Seymour are already plotting before Henry is actually dead for Seymour to become this Lord Protector role. What does William Paget get for it? Well, he gets loads of favours and money and titles, but none of the putting his head above the parapet. I think it's a very savvy move from the old Paget there. So that's why it happens so quickly. Basically, once Henry's dead, and Seymour is sort of made Protector quite quickly. Now there's because he is a child, you have this privy chamber setup, which Henry VII has sort of brought in. Henry VIII had made even sort of more standard. You have only about 4 real people who are around the king at any one time. You know, it is his most private moments because he's a child, and it sort of necessitates this. But as he grows, that means that those 4 people, those 4 men, whoever they are, have got the most power that you know of anyone in the government. And we'll come on to who they might have been and what they're up to. But Edward inherits a few problems, which end up being laid at Seymour's door, but economic problems, the debasement of the coinage under his father, which continues a little bit, of course, into his reign. And you have the religious changes that, of course, that hasn't gone away, all the things that Henry's brought in, not to mention all the social problems that have come out of the dissolution of the monasteries, for instance. Elizabeth I is still dealing with the homeless problem from that. So Edward must be dealing with that kind of thing. So there's a lot of unrest in the country. And there is rebellion. Like I say, that the blame for that, Somerset becomes a scapegoat for that. Anyway, so as Kat's already said, he ends up getting his head chopped off. He does make this really ridiculous move of taking Edward pretty much hostage at Hampton Court, and then deciding that's not a place where he can defend very easily, so he'll take him to Windsor Castle, which Edward despises. It's not ready for them. It's freezing cold, and Edward ends up getting ill. So this does not put Edward Seymour on a very good footing. Anyway, so he falls quite soon after that. Now, his successor as sort of chief advisor, I suppose, to the king as Lord Protector, is John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, Guildford Dudley's father, little Gilly. Now, he plays it very differently. And I think this speaks to Edward's personality. I mean, it speaks to how John Dudley was maybe a little more savvy. I think a lot more savvy, actually, than Edward Seymour had been. But he doesn't infantilize. Is that the right word? Infantilize Edward.
I was going to go with infanticide. I'm like, no, that's Richard.
Yeah. Oh, controversial, but true.
I just didn't upset Catherine.
I
hate mail's coming.
Trying to creosote my arse cheeks and sit on this fence. Stop trying to push me off.
Never.
Sorry, right, so no, it's fine. So he doesn't talk to him like a child, which Edward had tried to actually control the person. John Dudley plays it very differently. And Edward does assume, well, they decide Edward is going to assume his majority at the age of 14. When he turns 14, he's going to become, which is incredible.
Wild.
Now, wild. It has a precedent. It has a precedent in Richard II. That didn't go so well.
That worked out really well.
That went superbly.
Yes.
If you want to teach a teenage boy that he has absolute power and he doesn't answer to anyone, make him king at 14 in his own right. Brilliant. What a great idea. So anyway, so he goes into his majority at 14. He's a big stickler for rules, is our Edward. And Kat as well, you just said there about him being a bit of a prude. And he's very interesting because he was. Anyway, we'll come back to that in a minute. One of the things he would make his half-sister do, Elizabeth, is curtsy 5 times before she was allowed to sit down in his presence. That's very Richard II-esque as well, actually.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
So that's horrendous.
But that is very Richard II-ish, isn't it? Because he's the one who instigates the whole bowing and leaving the room and all that kind of crap.
Wow.
Yeah. Also, now this is quite. I feel like this is a little bit childish. So he had his favourite colours of red, white, and violet. That's red, white, and blue, basically, isn't it? He's already
he knew what was
before
coming.
he even knows. Branding. Now, to the point where, so that is known, and men at court don't wear the caps or in those colours so as not to appear to be in competition with him. So what kind of vibe is this little boy giving off that you can't even 3 different colours, 3 colours you can't wear a cap in? I mean, I don't know how much choice there was, but that would limit you somewhat, I would have thought. So there you go.
Worse.
Yeah, but it starts to show his sort of his
bellendery
attitude and bellendery. Yeah. Kat also mentioned his schoolmates, and he was very close to his schoolmates. Now, because he's grown up with these boys, they are probably going to be the ones making up this group of the very intimate private circle, these 4 people who have the absolute ear of the king all the time. He's showing that he wants to be involved, that he has interest in sports, hunting, that kind of thing, very similar to his father. So he's with his young mates and they're all capable of being in the saddle for hours on end and playing tennis and all of this. And one of them is this Barnaby Fitzpatrick, which a little plug here. Gareth Russell is doing a talk on Barnaby Fitzpatrick for the Tudors Online History Festival in November. So there's loads that we don't know about him yet that Gareth's going to enlighten us on. But Barnaby is 2 or 3 years older than Edward, and he's already in 1551 he takes his oath to serve the king as a member of his privy chamber. So the politics of the court is already shifting because these boys are going from the classroom into government, which would have been interesting.
The nursery, as it was now called.
Yeah. Now, of course, that's hit by tragedy. So he's hit by personal tragedy because 2 of his sort of close buddies are the Brandon boys, who die within an hour of each other when the sweat hits in 1551, which must have been incredibly devastating as well. I don't know what that has an entry in his diary. So there's that. There was also a marriage alliance being pursued. Actually, Barnaby Fitzpatrick was one of the delegation that went to pursue marriage negotiations with the French court for the French Princess Elizabeth hand. Now, she is staunch Catholic, and they're saying, the French say, there's absolutely no way she's going to convert. Well, of course, we know Edward isn't going to convert either. But he is adamant that he isn't going to marry a subject. And so he is prepared, like actually Charles I ends up being, prepared to make that alliance, regardless of the fact that they are not going to agree on religious matters, which I think is quite interesting, because you see him then you're seeing him put politics ahead of his religious ideology at that point.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of interest about the suppression of chantry chapels, but I don't think that's not really relevant. So we don't have to do that because we're going to run out of time. So the last bit that I will cover, though, is, of course, the succession, which, again, Kat's touched on. And a lot is made of Edward's religious preferences. But yes, that informs his choice of a successor. But what he does is, because he is concerned that Mary, his eldest living, because he only has female potential heirs as well. There's only female potential heirs. The eldest one of those is his half sister Mary. She, as we've just discussed, doesn't, and I'm sure Catherine will go into, doesn't want to change, will not change her religion. So he refers back to the Act of Succession 1536, which makes Mary illegitimate. That same act also made his other half-sister, Elizabeth, illegitimate. Therefore, neither of them can be in the succession. So he then there's the Scottish line, but his father had taken them out of the succession. Edward does, so Edward follows suit and does the same, and he follows down the line of his. Also, Henry VIII's youngest sister Mary's her line. Now, we've just said the Brandon the Brandon boys wouldn't have been in line. Ignore me. Sorry. So you've got Mary, and that leads to the Grey line, the Grey sisters. And like Kat says, he wants to write his device for the succession. This is in his own writing, and he does it really fast in the end. He's caught smallpox and measles in the same year, 1552, 1553, yeah. And then by the have I got the right year there? Yes, 1552. He catches measles and smallpox. In the winter into the spring of 1553, he has this cough he just can't shift. Then he rallies as the weather gets warmer. He goes off to Greenwich, where the air is a bit clearer, but he decides he probably should have a go at writing his will. And that's when he writes in his own hand his device for the succession, as he calls it. And he is trying to work out basically who is going to have a son quickest. So he takes Frances Brandon, who's already 35, the mother of the Grey sisters, totally past it. No geriatric way.
Past it.
Presumably because she's not had a baby for quite a few years by this point. So he's basically putting a bet on who is going to get to have a son first. So he plumps for the Grey sisters in their order of age. As he gets sicker, he has to change that to say, rather than the issue of or the sons of Jane, it will be Jane who succeeds him, because he just goes downhill so fast. And that's it, really. I should have built up to the end a little bit better. But yes, that's
the end.
So although it's seen as very religious, there is also that very strong in his decision is the legitimacy line. He wants a legitimate heir, and the line from which the Grey Sisters come is not a disputed line. It is legitimate. So there you go. And I think you're right. I think Jane not only is very intelligent, she is as pious, as radical, I think, as Edward.
Pair of fun sponges.
I was going to say, they were not fun at parties.
Oh,
most pretentious teenage shits I think you could probably.
Although I do wonder if Edward had reached an age where he was married and had eventually had sex, maybe he would have just
chilled
stick up his ass. He would have unclenched ever so slightly.
Like the Harry Enfield sketch show.
Yes.
Don't tell it. Yes, I was going to say.
Yes. Yeah.
And then he comes down one morning after he's had sex and he's like, hair slicked back. Hello, mummy.
Hello, daddy.
I'm going to go and find a job today. Yeah.
Oh dear.
Sorting himself out.
Yeah.
So there we go. What an absolute joy the pair of them were. Probably slightly more fun than Oliver Cromwell, but not much.
Oh, are you going to talk about the bird plucking, Catherine?
I don't have the bird plucking because I don't think that was an act of religion. I mean, it might have been, but as I was covering religion, I was glad didn't. I don't
know where bird plucking comes in. We've talked about it a lot, so I just do want to flag that the bird plucking story where he goes in and plucks this bird and pulls it into 4 quarters and then says, "You have plucked me, trust and believe I'm going to pluck you," to his counsellors as a young boy, is deeply chilling. Don't quite know where it fits. I think it's maybe a sort of personal, political, it could have straddled either of them. I do just want to flag that there is an earlier story about the Emperor Charles V when a boy doing the exact same thing because the woman he was supposed to marry married somebody older. And the falcon plucking of Edward may coincide, or the story of it may coincide with the rough wooing of Mary Queen of Scots potentially falling apart. So we have somebody thinking it's valuable for these 2 stories. I'm not sure if either one of them did it, but there is something valuable about this level of violence. And because in Edward's case, it's questionable as whether the bird's dead or alive. In the case of the Emperor Charles V, it is, to me, incontrovertible that bird was alive when he started plucking it. He sends somebody, he sees it in the market, sends somebody to buy it, brings it in and starts plucking it. So I just want to flag that quickly.
Lottie Rose, that's some future serial killer shit.
But I'm not sure if it's true. I'm not sure if either one of them did it. In which case, why is the story told, by whom, and for what purpose?
I could bring in a story that was something he actually knows. Now he is persuaded by he has a parson or preacher at court called Lever, Lever, and he is. It would have been interesting if Edward had lived, how Barnaby Fitzpatrick may or may not have survived court, because Lever was after him. Barnaby Fitzpatrick was interested in the ladies, and so anyway, this Lever guy managed to persuade Edward to sign his first ever death warrant and execution warrant, and it was actually for a fellow Protestant, a lady called Joan Boucher. Not quite sure her name actually. I have got it written down, but anyway,
Boucher. Yeah, it might be French.
So, sure. I mean, basically, because she wouldn't comply with their word for word ideology, she wanted to argue that Jesus could not have been born of the Virgin Mary, because he was a spiritual being, effectively. And Edward doesn't want to sign actually for quite a while, but Lever manages to persuade him to saying that she's dangerous and you can't have these kind of people. But so his first death warrant, it's not for a Catholic, it's for a fellow Protestant who just doesn't believe the exact thing that she is prescribed.
Wow. Interesting.
Jesus.
Yeah, him too. He's involved. He's involved in this.
Well, that's another discussion. Anyway,
is it rapid? Is it rapid time? Let's do it quick. Let's do this.
Let's do this. Oh, that's a fucking busted thing. Right, someone did say to me last week, 1 layer. 1 layer is a bit better.
Just get on with it.
Widows of Lancaster.
Here we go. Right.
Okay.
Dear widows, I need your help urgently as I only have days to resolve my situation. I am due in 3 days to be tried for witchcraft, and it feels as though the trial is merely a formality. I believe I was set up. A local nobleman who has a very nosy wife came to me and said she was unwell with a terrible fever and had had a headache and cough for several days. He called it COVID-16-19. I mixed her a remedy, which he paid me for, and took to her. A couple of days later, he stormed into the village and said she was dead and that I had poisoned her, and he believed this was an act of witchcraft. This was fueled as local gossips claimed they had heard me say that she was a nasty wench and no one would miss her if she died. It serves them right, as they each of them have now broken out in nasty, disfiguring boils.
Right.
I have no family, as they all mysteriously died after coming to my house for dinner a year ago. Okay. My husband cannot speak to defend me, as he tripped one day and his tongue accidentally fell out. I'm all alone in the world with no one to help me. What can I do to save myself from a certain verdict of guilty and the punishment of death? Yours in despair, Griselda. P.S. I'm not a witch, honest. P.P.S. I know where you live.
Right.
So a desperate situation indeed. A desperate situation indeed. What can we do?
Wow.
This who knows where we live. And it's definitely not a witch.
Just for a start by saying, Griselda, love you, babe. Love your work.
Loving your work.
Feel like anything that may or may not have happened was justified. I
come on, Kat.
Feel like I feel like Griselda, you might have some abilities. That's definitely not witchcraft. I'm not calling it witchcraft. I think you might have some lucky perchances that mean you can deal with the people that are accusing you by making them be dead. And then you should leave.
Kill. Yeah,
then you should leave.
Be killed.
I recommend you get to a harbour, you get on a boat, you fuck off, you change your name. Try not to kill people wherever you end up.
That's good advice.
Depending on who they are or what they did.
Well, no, because then she'll have to do it again. She'll have to move again.
I fear, Griselda, that you may actually be on the run for the rest of your life. But the good news is that
learn how to
see swim. Of the 17th century, there's no tracking devices internet, so that will make it harder for you to keep on the move. In fact, yeah, definitely. But as Kat said, if in doubt, poison. It's the usual fallback, obviously, at this stage. Well, obviously, as Kat also mentioned, it's not. Shh.
It didn't work.
That was Philippa, not me and Kat.
She doesn't know my powers.
Dorothy, Griselda gets on a boat mysteriously sinks.
But it wouldn't, because it wouldn't. No, because she's not a witch.
She's not a witch. And we all know, what is it? Witches weigh the same as a duck or something like that.
True.
Witches can swim.
You can walk on water.
A long way.
Yes.
Oh no. Well, she definitely needs a boat then.
Alternative suggestion: make your way to court. Tell any court, and tell the monarch that you can do alchemy. that you can turn base metal into gold, and they won't give a shiny shit.
Here you are.
If you have poisoned 15 villages, they won't give a throttly fuck.
Not that you have, but just know, in case anyone.
I suggest you take your witchcraft and you turn it to alchemy, sweetheart, and just do that.
So there we go. Become an alchemist.
That's it.
A mobile alchemist, if necessary.
Very mobile.
A wandering alchemist. And you never know, you might bump into John D and he's, keys in a fruit bowl. So you could have a gangbang. So there's that.
Right.
Is it a gangbang if there's only 2 of you? I don't think it is.
I wasn't there when John D was frapping whatever was going on there. You don't know they weren't all in the bed together.
I'm going for just as a literal thing. Is I don't think just 2 people, any 2 people, not necessarily just if it's just 2 people, that's not a gangbang, is it?
No, but there were 4 of them, and Griselda's 5. That's a gangbang.
That was just a general kind of anyway. I don't know. And there's a great Ninja Sex Party song called "Orgy for One" as well. If we're on that, yeah. So there we go. If in doubt. Fabulous. Also, as somebody mentioned earlier on my live earlier, and it did come up in the comments just now, something else Catherine hates, speaking of being on the water, is swans. I hate swans. I hate them.
Fair.
Thank you. Thank you. Fair.
A sword will break your arm. They'll break your arm. They are. I don't like birds in general.
Yeah.
Do you think they could injure a horse?
No, I think
a horse might kick its face in.
In the rock paper scissors of animals that are violent. I think horse trumps swan.
Okay, so what's the third one? Horse, swan, and
kangaroo. That fucks everything up. That will fuck you up.
Or an ostrich. That'll fuck you up.
Yeah. Too. Oh no, a cassowary.
Bad. Cassowary. Yeah. They are
those
nasty.
Motherfuckers.
I wasn't going to say cassowary because I didn't know if anyone knew what that was.
Honey badger. There's many candidates. Many candidates for
a nasty animal.
Horse, swan. Pick the third.
Right, we have
anyway, yes. So actually, I've just sort of got bits and pieces to add. Some of what I've written down has been covered already, but basically we're talking about. I'll try and wrap this up in not many minutes. I'm not sure this is going to happen. Edward's religion. So it's been touched on already, obviously, in what we've been talking about. And I think Edward is well known really for just his fervent Protestantism, because at this stage, under Henry, because Henry was a Protestant, but it wasn't. At this point, we were still talking about the Reformed Catholic faith. And it's under Edward really that we see Protestantism come into itself. So there is a change here really and Edward. Now Jack mentioned earlier on Instagram about, Edward had all these tutors and things for a while whilst they were very, very Protestant, whilst Henry was still alive. And I guess really since at the age of 6 he began his formal education, and Henry obviously was very invested in Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, because he basically got him what he wanted when he needed it. And he was the AB of C at this point. So he's the guy to have. Good mug. He's and the mug. He's the guy to have around. And so he trusts Cranmer, and Cranmer probably had a hand in choosing some of little Timmy Edward's tutors. So Timmy Edward. So Richard Cox and John Cheek, whichever you want to pronounce, were people who were Reformed Catholics or Erasmians and later Mary in exile, so had to flee to the continent when Mary popped up with her counter-reformation a few years later. And people like these became Edward's tutors. So you do see these people of Reformed faith playing a very large part in his education. He's also educated with Elizabeth some of the time, and mentioned how all 3 of them lived together. She, as we know later on, took a more Protestant line in her faith. Kat also mentioned that he had Catherine Parr as his mother figure, and she was very dear to him up to the point at which she wasn't, which is kind of how it worked with Edward quite a lot of the time. Once again, quite like his daddy. I like you till I don't. Yeah, basically. So where am I going? Well, I'm trying to sort of like shrink this down a little bit as much as I can. So his christening, Kat talked a little about his christening. So at that point, that was fairly Catholic, just because that's where things were. And there were some observations of him as a younger child, taking part in things like the Mass and all of those types of things. But obviously at this point, we don't have Protestantism. His father's still around. He's still very much, he isn't in a position to exercise all these types of things. And he was later on. By the age of 12, he wrote a small treatise against the primacy of the Pope. So by this age, obviously, he's been king for a bit, and we're really seeing lots of things moving forward. And rather how his father wrote the defence for Catholic. What was it Henry wrote?
It was
in defence of the
seven sacraments.
That's it. Yeah. So he's gone the other way, and he's writing this against the Pope and the papacy. And he said that in this, the papacy was unable to cite as evidence adduce its supremacy from Scripture, and so Protestant adherents were not bound by the Pope's authority and free to follow their own faith. So that was sort of quite one of his more politer, calmer ways of speaking out against the Pope. But he also called the Pope the very son of the devil, an antichrist, and an abominable tyrant.
Yeah,
rich.
He went for it.
Henry also wrote on a number of theological controversies, such as, for example, he talked about the Pope was said to have the keys to heaven. Well, how could the Pope have the keys to heaven? Because it's a physical object. And when you die, you can't hold physical objects. That means the Pope can't get into heaven. That means he can't be the Pope and things like that. Yeah, he spent a long. Literal. You can read about all this. I don't recommend it. It's very boring, but you can. It's all out there. It is interesting, but it's a slog. I was reading something. It's a little bit of a slog, but in some ways it's interesting because it's a real insight into how his mind was working at the time, and it does make some interesting arguments and some fair points. But it depends how interested you are.
You can't hold keys.
16th century theology. I don't know if anyone
wants to hold keys, but Jesus or equally can't have been a spiritual entity. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's an element to which the Protestant Reformation and the questions that start to be asked by Wycliffe, and then when you go into Luther and Tyndale and these kinds of and Calvin, the questions about what is scriptural and what the notion of the afterlife is and what purpose is and what heaven represents and how you get in there and all of that kind of stuff. Once you open that door, that genie comes out of the bottle and it becomes, well, we see it, don't we? We see the aftermath of the Reformations in Europe, but particularly the Reformation in England. All of these different faiths, Levelers, Diggers, Anabaptists, all coming up, Puritans, still Roman Catholics, all of the rest of it. And it does pose real profound danger. Everyone is eyeballing, all through Elizabeth's reign, they're eyeballing Roman Catholics, but it's Puritans that kill a king.
Well, once you've said that your religion can be individual, then you have as many variations as you have individuals, and that was one of the dangers identified. Yes.
That was very nearly the case. I've got bits of here about the rough wooing and the engagement as the Scots pulling back his engagement to Mary, Queen of Scots, but we haven't really got time to cover that. So in January 1547, Henry VIII dies. Hooray! But no, oh dear, how sad. And Edward was crowned king at Westminster Abbey on the 20th of February. Now, the ceremonies had been shortened for two reasons. One, because they said it's very long for a small boy to sit through all that crap, and probably everybody else, and it was a good excuse. But also because the Reformation said some of these ceremonies were inappropriate. They weren't required anymore. Cranmer confirmed Edward's royal supremacy, calling Edward a second Josiah, who was the 16th king of Judah, who introduced major religious reform, and urged him to continue reforming the Church of England from the tyranny of the bishops of Rome, banished from your subjects and images removed. It's very dramatic. Yes. So obviously, and we talked about this last week when we did Thomas Seymour. We didn't do Thomas Seymour. When we talked about Thomas Seymour, Somerset had the Protectorate, and coming into 1549, his popularity was declining dramatically. There was a coup d'etat, and when he found out he was under threat, he has mentioned, whisked him off to Windsor Castle. Bad idea, all went horribly wrong. And John Dudley, who Earl of Warwick, who becomes Northumberland, does in fact, as Philippa said, take his place. But also, as Philippa said, he kind of goes, no, this is the time now. This young man can rule in his own right. He knows what he's talking about. He doesn't need all of you to sort it out for him. Whilst he's in his ear trying to sort it out for him, basically, at the end of the day. He's executed. Poor old Seymour is executed. And also we talked about how it was very, very clearly said by Edward that he just had his head cut off. But he's had this Cranmer had introduced a huge amount of religious reform in this period. I mean, we don't have time. You could list it, major changes. I mean, it really became unrecognised. Now, some of this didn't have time to go through because it got into the spring of 1533, and it becomes very obvious at this point that Edward is not long for this world.
53, not 33.
Oh God, yes, sorry. Several years before he was even born, in fact. He was that forward thinking. He was reforming it before he was even born.
But the reforms are incredibly destructive, physically destructive.
Yeah.
The changes to the chapels. So the bit I didn't cover, which links to the politics, is the suspension of all chantry chapels, which includes St Stephen's Chapel in the Palace of Westminster. So then so basically deconsecrating effectively even chapels within royal palaces. Taking out stained glass windows in the Chapel Royal of Hampton Court Palace. Anything that has the Virgin Mary on it, or even Christ on the cross, people are seeing a physical destruction of things. And it doesn't matter whether his relations are there. It just, his mother's heart is buried in the chapel at Hampton Court. Doesn't stop anything happening there. It must have been really quite shocking, even for people who might have supported it. That's such a change, and it's such a physical destruction. There's so much physical destruction that went with it. Sorry.
Well, it really, I'll talk about that now. But it really, like you were saying, in terms of that destruction, it's almost like it was just a continuation of the damage done by the dissolution. So that had kind of come to a point, but there were bits left. I went, no, that's not far enough. We have to just really, like you say, Philippa, we just have to destroy this. We have to take it. We have to make sure it's not there, no matter how dramatic this is. And it must have been awful. And then the world was literally being destroyed around people. Yeah. And as Philippa, like you say, there were people that had supported things to a point, but there must have been, actually now, they've had that ripped from under them. And as you say, it's pretty harsh. Like, So anyway, Northumberland has control of the Privy Council at this point, and he is trying to take, as Philippa said, a different tack to Somerset. He's learnt from his mistakes, and he's trying to encourage people on the council. He's looking for people that he knows he can get support from to be on the council here, and keeping them on side in whichever way he can. And he's using that to legitimise this authority that he's now got, because many people were saying, why him? Not really you. You're not really, you're not really sort of the type of person that should automatically get this job. But he had to get another level of support, because obviously Seymour was a blood relative and he wasn't. Who was he really compared to a lot of the people that had been there before? So John Guy said, like Somerset, he became quasi-king. The difference was that he managed the bureaucracy on the pretense that Edward had assumed a full sovereignty. Overall, though, as I'm sure most of you know, Northumberland was not massively popular. He did share, obviously, Somerset's policy on religion. He wanted to see the Reformation going forward, but perhaps even more fervently. So he was very much in Edward's ear to do this. And Edward had a limited influence on the government in a number of respects. But he said, if you're going to be in my administration, you have to be reform. You have to support reformation. That's it. If you don't, there is not a place for you here at all. So, as I said, this massive reform took place. So Cranmer wrote, I'm going to have to read this bit, sorry, a liturgy on the daily services and religious festivals, the Act of Uniformity, the first of which was in 1549, but had 3 versions of it in the end. The Book of Common Prayer in 1549, you may have heard of the Prayer Book Rebellion, where 5,500 people roughly lost their lives in Devon and Cornwall over that. These are all things that we don't really have time to discuss now, but are really interesting to look at if you wanted to. So, and these are all acts that are really seen as quite extreme. They're really changing the face of the country via the religious policies of Edward, really. Now, he, again, fun sponge, was said to have read 12 chapters of script every day and loved sermons. He was described by John Fox as a godly imp and could follow.
Oh, God.
He was obviously really heavily influenced by all those people around him from the time he had those tutors up until his father passed away, and then the heavy hitters bundled round him, obviously. Now, he may have drawn all those conclusions anyway. We just don't know. But the reformed doctrines around this time were made official. So things like justification by faith alone became sort of, these weren't just sort of ideas that were bandied around. These became sort of actual things, and ordinals of 1550 replaced by the divine ordination of priests with a government. So basically it was run more like a government system, an appointment system. You weren't just, you're a bit holy, you'll do. That wasn't quite how it worked before. But anyway, it was more like we had with when we talked about John Knox. It was more about people being able to choose and elect the people they wanted to be their religious leaders and so forth. And as I said, Cranmer was not able to put everything in place before Edward was passed away. But obviously, once it became obvious that he was very unwell, everybody panicked, because basically the Reformation was resting on Edward. And they all knew that although, that technically, and Philip obviously spoke about the succession, Mary was going to have a lot of support, whatever happened. And she wasn't going to sit around going, yeah, let's carry on with all this Protestantism. She was like, no, it's all about the Catholicism. And she was obviously going to try and take the country back to Rome. And that is exactly what she did try and do. Anyway, that's another story. But as Edward was dying, that you had to make this legitimacy. Philip has said his sisters, he used the fact that his sisters had been declared illegitimate as one of the things against them, even though he would have maybe trusted Elizabeth with his reformed faith. But he also, he wanted there to be a male line, and but there wasn't one. So he did go over to Jane Grey, who, as Philip has said, was conveniently married to Northumberland's son Dudley.
Well, conveniently just married.
Literally.
Yeah. There was all of those. There was the Grey sisters. There were some shotgun weddings with no. They were
all married at the same time, weren't they?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
two on the same day and one on a different day.
But within,
I think, like a week of each other.
Yeah, it was.
They were like, get these girls breeding
quickly,
immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately, if not sooner.
If not sooner, I love those. Anyway, so Edward overturned Henry VIII's third act of succession, which had, we could debate all that another time as well about, well, Henry's dead, so why does what counts anyway? But again, that's another debate. So in June 1553, he signed a clean draft, as Philippa said, where he removed Francis from the succession. He signed this in 6 places, so obviously it was 6 times more important than if he'd only signed it once. And he demanded that there were a lot of high-ranking judges present for all this to prepare this as a letters patent, and said it was to be passed in Parliament. He was going to have it passed in Parliament. He mumped it. Anyway, the councillors and all of these other lawyers and other people had to sign a bond in his presence, and saying that they would perform his will being to have Jane Grey become king. Jane Grey become queen. Some were said to have spoken up against it, but Northumberland kind of was like, no, I'll have you if you do. And it was said that they would be traitors. Someone said, you will be traitorous if you do not sign this and you do not support your king. So on 21st of June, it was signed by over 100 notables, but many later said that they had basically been bullied by Northumberland. So originally we always had this thing that Edward had changed his device, put his device together because Northumberland pressured him, because he had married his son to Jane. He wanted Jane to be queen, so his son, thank you very much, could be king, and he would get control that way of the country and get all this power. So that was very traditionally the line that's been spun. Now, more recently, people are saying, well, we don't know. This could very well be Edward. Yeah, he had this guy in his ear, and this guy's not going to say no. But, we look at Edward's behaviour, beliefs, wherever they had come from. This dude was Protestant. He was all over it like a rash. So we can't say that he didn't put this succession together, fervently want it. And he signed it 6 times, for Christ's sake. I mean, what more can you want?
It's in his own hand.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
It's not dictated. It's not
it's not dry stamped. We've got none of that business going on.
He is so sick that he is still sitting up to write this document.
I mean, he means business.
Either that means he's being incredibly pressured and forced in his sickbed, which is wicked, or he gives a shit massively.
Ladies, we are going to have to wrap it up. I'm sorry,
but basically, he signed Jane.
Starts in 3 weeks. In 3 minutes, even.
Basically, he signed Jane Grey's death warrant, hasn't he? He dies. He has reformed rights done by Cranmer, and apparently he's amongst his last words, if not his last words, were, "Oh my Lord, God defend this realm from papistry."
I would recommend then The House of Dudley by Joanne Paul, because she looks into John Dudley's role in significant detail, and I have a different view of the summary you have just given, but we do not have time to go into it now.
Ooh.
If you're coming to the after show party, then perhaps we can carry on the discussion there, because ladies, we begin that in 3 minutes time, so we are going to have to say goodbye.
Right, let's wrap it all up. Where places you can come and find us? Where are those places?
I'm the Historical Collaborator on YouTube and Historical Collaborator on Instagram.
I'm Reading the Past and Various Forms of Katrina Marchant.
British History on YouTube and Substack, and British History Tours on Instagram and Facebook.
Kat, you're not here next week. Fee and Philippa haven't had a discussion about whether or not we're doing something, which we probably should.
Keep your eyes peeled on the social media.
Week after is Roundup week.
Cool.
Do also go to our link tree, find all of our things. We have merch. You can buy us a coffee. We've got a Substack which is going to be our hub. That is so buymeacoffee.com/had podcast. And keep your eye on that, because the next time that we open up for a after party, that's where you go to get it. And it also helps us to buy the Winnebago so we can torment Catherine.
Indeed.
Which you know you
with
love.
Sausage rolls and tea.
Any more before I count us out?
Please send your past problems to Past Problems Postbag, History After Dark 2021 thank you at gmail.com. Past Problems Postbags, we need lots of those, please.
Thank you for joining us. We will see. Well, some of us will see you next week. Maybe I'll see you in 2 weeks. And for those joining at the after party, see you in a minute. That is 3, 2, 1. Bye.